The Sisters arc of A Certain Magical Index single-handedly saves the show from mediocrity and puts it squarely on the map of creatively designed and executed anime. Without the arc, the show is stripped of the importance of its most recognizable character, denied the full exploration of its concepts, and forced to take a spot next to every other light novel adaptation with a superpowered high school where the students fight and the main character inexplicably always wins and surrounds himself with tons of women. It's through this arc that many problems I had with the show are resolved, and it personally moves the score from a 5.5 to a strong 7 in my book. How exactly it does this is incrementally in 4 important scenes that I'll break down. Upon meeting Misaka's 10032, Toma is abruptly confronted with a character completely different from the rest of the show's cast. Even though at this point he's seen and briefly spoken to Misaka 10031, this lengthy conversation that he and 10032 have demonstrates just how strange the behavior of the clones is. Their use of the third person is deeply indicative of how they were raised, since their very speech is a narration of their lives that's meant to serve as an experiment report to the other clones and to the overseeing scientists. It's a quirk that only they can pull off, because it only makes sense for them to talk that way in the show's world. I should also note that the rest of their interaction on that night is enjoyable because of how it plays around with the differences in the characters' senses of humor, but that has a small impact on my opinion compared to what comes later. Misaka 10031's death was not nearly as important in changing my opinion as other parts of this arc, but it still holds narrative weight. When we see Accelerator kill Misaka 10031, it adds real stakes to the arc, because at this point the audience is not aware that this show is willing to kill more than 10,000 people just to prove a point about scientific advancement. It also shows that Misaka 10032 doesn't think of herself as a person, but as a small cog within the machine of the experiment. When she says that she unmistakably did die, she could be talking about herself or the Misaka before her, and it still wouldn't make a difference to her, which is reflected in her use of the third person, and when she says that all of the Misakas gathered are in fact Misaka. They're all the same in their eyes, just meant to be used for a greater purpose. With that in mind, when Toma confronts Mikoto on the bridge, now with the knowledge of the sisters' experiments and the memory of 10031's brutalized corpse fresh in his mind, he knows he's asking her to do something incredibly difficult by stepping down. All he knows when he arrives there is that he doesn't like where this is headed. Mikoto expresses this admirable position that she wants to take responsibility for the lives of her clones, even if they don't see themselves as valuable. She wants them to have free lives, not to be used as human sacrifices towards some vague goal of a level 6 academy student. This directly contrasts with the prime mentality of Academy City, though. In a city built around the idea that scientists could, almost without limitation, do whatever it takes to learn more about the world and propel humanity forward, it makes sense that some would take that to an extreme and wonder what lay beyond the level of power that they had prescribed to level 5 by exercising lethal level 5 power usage against human subjects. It's this fascinating tug-of-war between the preservation of humanitarian values and the need for scientific curiosity to be sated. It also plays well with the challenges that the show later poses, where religious fanaticism for the satisfaction of a group faces off against individual rights. But this scene on the bridge doesn't just show a duality of philosophy. Throughout the conversation, Toma is forced to deal with the indecision that he came to this scene with. His unwillingness to move forward towards any real resolve besides getting in Mikoto's way earns him a heavy criticism and a direct blast of lightning. He's selfishly stopping someone else's solution without positing a way to solve the problem himself. And that kind of thinking just runs them short on time. In the end, Toma has to make a stand. He'll fight Accelerator for the sake of undermining the scientific premise that these sick experiments were built on. He was forced out of his indecision to think of a new option, as he puts it. And all the progress that the show makes in this arc is culminated in the Accelerator fight scene. Prior to this point, arcs haven't seemed importantly related. This arc is still distinct from the others in its events, but there's one important plot point that ties this back to past arcs. The destruction of the tree diagram in the first arc of the series undermines the entire foundation of the level 6 experiment. Without that machine to work on the calculations for Accelerator's growth, the experiment is on its last legs. Should anything happen to degrade the trust in those results, the whole thing could easily be invalidated. Toma has to win to put the nail in the coffin for this whole debacle, and Accelerator has to win this fight to keep the wheels going on this process, even if he doesn't know it at the start of the conflict. It's only after seeing Toma's ability to negate his vector changes that he switches his mentality to be more serious. Accelerator actually has a lot of dichotomies within his character. His top is black and white, with pointed arrows like the vectors he manipulates. Vectors have reversible directions in addition to their magnitudes. As I just mentioned, he seems to have two modes, a casual one and a serious one. It's fairly telling that the title of this episode is Accelerator One Way, because he's deeply resolved to finishing the experiment in this part of the story, but his mentality completely changes direction later in the story, when he seeks to destroy everything related to this part of his life. Accelerator is also a landmark villain in the series, as he's a major change in pace from those we've encountered up to this point. The previous nemeses that Toma's faced were analogs for his relationship with Index, as they themselves were her companions in previous years. The others were also entirely magic-based. The first arc obviously had to set up the idea of magic and its logical workings, or the inherent lack thereof, but the second arc focused on a specific aspect of the magical community. In developing these things, though, the show had excluded science from the equation. Even though the characters live in the most advanced city on Earth, they aren't doing anything science-related because that would directly contradict the workings of magic in this world. The show promises, in the episode preview, that when science and magic cross paths, the story begins, but up until this point, I had been sorely disappointed by the lack of science introduced or explored. Accelerator fixes all of these things. He's not an analog for Toma, but a warped example of what happens when one mentality goes on without opposition and achieves success without regard for the consequences of doing so. Accelerator's character deeply explores the implications of the recklessly uninhibited scientific society that Academy City presents us with, and Toma has to oppose him in a way that conversely treats everyone involved with respect and seeks to guarantee everyone's safety and contentedness, even if he can't make a perfect solution by somehow undoing the damage caused by the experiments. Accelerator is a great villain, especially when he's introduced at this point in the series, because he has an imaginative science-based power set which is explored thoroughly and a mentality which challenges the main character's resolve. I hope this has helped you to appreciate this arc as much as I do, and if you're watching this but haven't seen a certain magical index, I'd honestly recommend the show for this arc alone, even if it doesn't ever reach this level of careful thought after this point. If you like my stuff, be sure to keep tabs on me, and I'll see you in the next one.